Guys, thank you for joining us today on Grounded H2X. Today we have Chandler James, Chief of Staff of Riverside Project. You ever question yourself, the foster care system, how it's messed up, it's always broken, and you think like the system is broken? These are valid questions. Now get to hear from somebody that actually lives it, that does ministry about it, that's doing the actual work, and you can too. So we have an open dialogue, great conversation. You can't miss this one. There's people that are in need here in Houston, over 3,000 that are displaced kids in foster care programs, and that's one too many. So we have to do something about it. Please join us for this podcast. I know it's going to be a blessing to your life. Thank you for all the likes, the comments, and subscriptions. We thank you for everything. You got to check this one out. Guys, thank you for joining us today. Today, I have an awesome friend. Chandler James is with us. He's going to tell us a little bit about what he works, the projects that he's doing. I've had some time knowing him, short time, probably a little bit over a year. And I'm blessed to have him as a friend and for what he's doing here in Houston and beyond. Let's get to know him. You can't miss this podcast. It's a real good one. So, Chandler, give us who are you? How did you start the project that you got going on, and how'd you get involved? Tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, for sure. Well, first off, thanks for having me. It's been good to know you for the last year or so. I've gotten to know you really well. But
appreciate it.
Like you said, my name's Chandler. I work for a nonprofit here in Houston that is kind of a collaborative network within the foster care space. So essentially, I work there as our director of church mobilization. The organization is called the Riverside Project. And so it's been around since 2018, but primarily what we do is we are a collaborative network that brings people together. So organizations, passionate people, churches, other nonprofits, really to come together, work alongside one another to transform the foster care system here in Houston. So with that, we work with over 30 plus different nonprofits. We work with a ton of different nonprofits that do various different things that touch the foster care system here in Houston. We work with many different churches, which is obviously how you and I got to meet over the last year or so. Your church has done really great work in the city, things
Thank
like
you,
that.
Appreciate it.
But foster parent myself. Been a foster parent for the last 4 years, which I'm sure we can talk a little bit about as well.
We're going to dive into that. Bro.
Have been at a couple churches on staff, things like that. So,
that's
thanks
great.
for having me, man.
Oh, absolutely. So are you native Texan, or where are you from? Or
from Houston, kind of born and raised, more so on the south side of Houston, but
that's cool.
So
that's cool, man. So what actually initiated they probably know, I know, but how did you get involved with, this project, working with foster care?
Yeah. So when we think about child welfare or foster care, things like that, man, growing up, I always felt this desire, even as I got married, my wife and I, we've always had this desire to be a foster parent or an adoptive parent, or in some capacity, just invite people in to our lives. And even growing up, which I don't know if I ever told you this before.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, even before we started recording, I didn't even think to tell you this, but growing up, my family adopted my little brother out of the foster care system when he was 10. And so I think, even thinking about it, from that point, then I was 13, 14 years old. Still really no concept for what is child welfare? What is foster care? I had no idea, right? But there was, I think, something in me, right? Just as a kid, growing up, I knew what it was like to have a brother that came out of the foster care system at an early age. And so I got to, just see the impacts of that, of what a diverse family setting looks like, things like that. And so, as I went to college and then later started working for a church, I had zero clue really about child welfare, foster care, what all that means, until I started working at a church on the north side of Houston, which I know we've talked about this before. But when I got to this church, this was about year maybe 6 or so of working at a church, in ministry, in that context. And when it was when I got to this particular church on the north side of Houston, kind of medium-sized church, probably 20 yards away from when you open up our sanctuary doors, there's this group home. Which is basically a group home of about 8 to 10 junior high school boys who have interacted with the foster care system in some capacity. They were in child welfare, and they're in this home. And it was at that point that I realized, man, I don't know anything about foster care.
Isn't that crazy?
But the one thing that I do know is that they came over every single Thursday night and played basketball. And I was like, I don't know anything about child welfare, but I'm really good at beating junior high kids in basketball. And so it's like, that's where I started,
Yeah,
you
that's
know? And I was like, I didn't know anything, you
mm,
know, but for us in our church, it really was like, I like to say it started with a basketball.
yeah,
And beating kids in basketball is where my passion for vulnerability in our city really started. And it was this idea, which I know we've talked about before, but
mm,
this idea of like, hey, not everybody is called to do the same thing, but
that's
everybody
right.
can do something,
They can do
right?
something.
And so back in like early 2020, that was my something. It was like I don't know anything else, but I know that I can play basketball with these kids. So
Wow.
that was kind of like the start of
That
like,
was
hey,
the
this is what this could
introduction of
look
it
like.
too,
Yeah,
So like playing basketball with them, feeding them and all that.
yeah,
But then they would just return back to the home, right? And then you were just like, "We'll see you next week," kind of stuff until
yeah,
something is
man.
like something has to click inside of you, right? It's like, man, hold up.
Yeah. So here in Houston, I mean, there's over like 100 different of these like group homes, RTCs, residential treatment centers, homes like that
Wow.
here in Houston. And the reality is like these kids live in these group type living situations because they either A, have no other options, or B, like they just require a level of care that
Mhm.
is beyond what the typical home can offer them. And so at that point, it was like, man, I don't know what else to do other than when they like run away from that home because something happened at the home or they got upset and they AWOL'd and they would just land at the church. They would sit on our like front porch of the church on the benches, or they would
Wow.
come hoop or anything like that. And it was like, man, I don't know what else to do other than buy you water, like hang out, sit with you, things like that. And the reality was at that point, it's not like they were like coming to church and like worshiping and like hanging out and doing Bible study. They actually like refused to do that. But the reality was like I knew like, hey, every Thursday night you'll be over here hooping. And when things happen, you'll come over here and you'll hoop. And then there would be a person, whether it was me or later, like as we built a culture within our church, that there'd be somebody there to care for that kid.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what it looked like, loving on them, learning about the staff, things like that. So
Because you
this is all
weren't
before I started
before you started the
obviously working on
working
staff at
for on
Riverside.
staff, but
But yeah.
you were on staff as a youth pastor, right?
Yeah, I was on staff as youth pastor at the time.
You had no idea what you were getting yourself
Yeah,
into,
man.
right? Like,
And it was a
man,
shift. Like I
it's a
know like
jungle,
you're a
bro.
pastor, you've been a pastor for a long time.
Yeah.
It was a shift for me, man, where it was like, hey, doing church like became like the least important thing, right? The Sunday service, the setup, the worship
Yeah,
slides, like the
protocol.
preaching, like it became like, man, this is what church is about. This is what like
Absolutely.
gospel centric ministry really looks like. It's caring for the most vulnerable in our city, which is our kids and families that come from really hard places, right? And so for me, it was
Wow.
a huge like mind shift for me. But
Yeah. And you accepted the call, man.
yeah,
I'm happy to say that you've done great work, man. Because
appreciate that.
not everybody would take it. I mean, most people that are probably watching this, we'll talk a little bit how to get connected, but um, tell us what are the real stats
Yeah,
and how difficult this system is, like what we would call quote unquote the system,
yeah.
and how devastating it is, and how the church is just kind of, oh well, that's not my problem kind of thing, or I don't know where to help, kind of
Yeah,
like I don't know what to do.
for sure. I mean, like just right off the top of my head in
Yeah.
terms of stats, right? Like, I mean, you got to think like, yeah, there's over 3,000 kids that are impacted by child welfare just here in Houston. Right. And so just like the Harris County area, and then you've got the
Mhm.
surrounding counties. So whatever you want to call Houston, right,
Right,
today, it
right,
could be,
right.
a million different counties that you would like call Houston. Some people are like Katie's Houston, things like that. But in Houston, in Harris County alone, there's over 3,000 kids
3,000.
involved in child welfare, which may not sound like a lot to some, but that's a ton of like vulnerability in our city. And those are just kids who have like directly been impacted or involved with direct CPS care. That's not including like those who,
Yeah,
like are unofficial placements and they moved in with their grandma, or this isn't including
this is
all
true.
vulnerability, right? This is just the
This is
like
true.
actual state placed kids that are kind of on paper, if you would. And so when we look at it, yeah, I mean, I think there's also over 3,000 churches in our city, right? And again,
Yeah,
it's not that like all 3,000 churches like here in the city should be integrated with caring for kids in the foster care system, but it is to say, hey, if there's 3,000 churches here in the city, there is a handful, hundreds even, right, that
yeah.
could be doing something.
Could do
And what
something.
we find for the most part, right, I think it's less of churches. We joke a lot on staff, like at the Riverside Project. It's not that I have yet to meet a church or a pastor or a leader that says, "Hey, I don't care about vulnerable kids and families." Never met them, right? Never met a pastor say, "Hey, I don't care about the family, the kid that's impacted by the foster care system that lives 5 minutes from our church building. Don't tell me about them." I've never met that pastor or leader. At the same time, I think churches, like how I just explained, where it's
Yeah.
like we don't know anything about child welfare. It's
Yeah.
very niche. It's very,
Hmm.
yeah, it's just very
Yeah.
niche,
Yeah,
right?
it's kind of like I thought this is a federal program. I thought this is a state
Right.
program.
Somebody else is
It's
doing it.
like,
Somebody
yeah,
else
we're
is
paying
taking care of
taxes for that kind of stuff. It's like, right? It's like most people would say.
Right. And so I think the reality is it's less that churches like don't see themselves doing anything. It's like what you said. It's like they just don't know where to start. And so like
Right.
really at the Riverside Project, like our hope and our idea when we talk about the work that we get to do alongside churches is, hey, let us serve as a guide for you. And so that we can kind of walk alongside you,
Yeah.
and help you find your place, kind of what we say, along the river, if you would. So
Yeah, along the river. We're gonna share that video. As a matter of fact, we'll share it with this podcast.
for sure.
But man, so tell me how it is being a foster parent.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Tell
like
me a
you
little bit
said,
about
I've been a
that.
foster parent for about 4 years. Yeah, it was shortly after, I think we got licensed, my wife and I, like late 2020, mid 2020, we kind of started the process of being a foster parent. And it really was out of the work that we were doing,
Mhm.
with that group home that was 20 yards from our church building,
Wow.
that accelerated that process for us. That we said, hey, like, we want to create a space, really a safe space for the next generation. And we've been doing that the best that we know how within a church context, within a church building, etc. And so, what does it look like to make our home like a space, where the next generation can find safety?
Mhm.
And that was the question that we asked. And that came along with just saying, hey, as long as we've got room in our house and we've got like the capacity to do it, like
Wow.
emotionally, and we've got the capacity to do it financially, then we're going to say yes to this. And so we started the licensing process, took us a long time to get through it. And then we opened our home, yeah, to just being a foster parent. And that has been like the wildest, as you know, a little
Yeah, I
bit
can
of our story,
imagine,
but
man.
the
And talk about
wildest
like
ride. Yeah.
that's like kind of like just inviting all kind of drama to
Yeah.
your life. It's like, oh yeah, we just got married, cool, newlyweds. Yeah, we're gonna be foster parents now. Let's like kind
Yeah.
of see where this goes.
Yeah. But it really did. I mean, it just came out of the idea of like, and not to like over spiritualize it per se, but it is this idea. And we talk a lot at the Riverside Project about it as well. Is just like, man, like we want to be the type of people, that move towards brokenness and toward hard places, not
This is
away
true,
from them,
man.
right? And I know you as a pastor has been through a lot of our trainings, but that's like a quote from Jason Johnson, one of our good friends of the organization. But
Mhm.
he says it all the time, right? That we want to be those kind of people, the ones that move towards brokenness, towards the difficult places,
Yeah.
not away from them. And so for us, it was like, yeah, and we're going to open our home and
Wow.
like start that process and invite, kids, and not just kids, but like their families into our lives. Right. And little did I know that that was going to completely change everything,
I can imagine.
right, in our life.
Yeah.
But, man, it's been a journey and it's been
Yeah.
good for the most part. So
Yeah. I've been
yeah,
interesting too.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Um, I remember this is something like on another scale. We didn't even talk about it, but I remember one of the kids in your program. I thought, this is your daughter. Thinking I was thinking it was your daughter. Her
Yeah.
car broke down, motor messed up,
Oh
and
yeah.
all
Yeah.
kind of stuff. And then there you are, like being dad, like we got to find you another car and all that kind
Yeah.
of stuff. And since I'm a mechanic, I took care of it. And then all of a sudden, I was just like, wait a minute. I never asked. This is one of the kids that were in placement with you.
Yeah.
And then Everett, he actually said, "Damn, bro, I was like, wow,
Yeah.
the sacrifice. I mean, we do a lot for our kids, our blood kids, but
Yeah.
these are kids that truly you're doing what God is what He's actually given as a commission to do,
Yeah.
and you're doing the work, man.
Yeah. I think it's a lot like, we talked about this before, and I hate to bring it like all the way back to the group home over and over again, but it was the pivotal moment for me
Yeah.
where I had to ask first,
Mhm.
hey, there's a group home that's like I could literally, like, not a figure of speech, throw a rock at, like from our church parking lot and hit the roof.
Mm.
And I had to ask myself, like, what am I gonna do about that?
Mhm.
Right. And I think like then it like progressed to like, as a church, it's saying, hey, there's a group home right in front of us.
Right in
What
front
are
of
we
you.
going to do about that?
Yeah.
And then it's like progressed to like, I have a 2,600 square foot house that can be opened like to vulnerable kids and families. What
Wow.
am I going to do about that? And it's just like this progress, and not like this like emptiness of like, we've got to do something and like, let's go like win everybody over. Like, it's less like that. And it's more of like, let's like from a place of humility say, hey, like, yeah, we've been given much. And so what does it look like for us to like show some hospitality, like open and like give in that way as well? And it
Wow.
is this like, you're talking about like the car situation, right?
Yeah.
Like sometimes I look at my like auto insurance bill and I'm like, I got 4 teenagers on my auto insurance bill and it is like so much money to have them
It's
on
like
it.
a mortgage, probably.
Yeah.
It's
Oh,
a,
yeah,
it's
very
about,
much so it is.
yeah,
But it is like a
yeah,
step back. Like, and I've had people like say, hey, like you just need to not have them on your auto insurance. And then I start to step back and it's always like, okay, but if I don't, then what?
then
Right.
what?
And it is about, I think, asking that question.
Yeah.
Like, and we talk about this in church spaces a lot, but if not me, then like who's going to do
Who's
that?
gonna do it?
Right.
Yeah, if not me, then
Uh,
who?
yeah, exactly. So,
Yeah, absolutely. So there you are, fostering. You got four kids to the program. Can you
yeah.
explain a little bit?
Yeah, I think I told you before, but it's basically like we best describe it as like, hey, we currently care for 4 kids, specifically teenagers, who have been impacted by foster care in some form or fashion.
Wow.
2 of them have come to us through like actual like licensed placements of ours.
Wow.
And then 2 of them were siblings to those 2 that we've just like kind of supported throughout the years. They've all lived with us at some point in time. And so, but kind of at various times. But yeah, that's been kind of our world. We started with like we got our first placement, I think in 2021, January 2021. It was a 2-year-old. She ended up reunifying about 2 years later with her biological mom, which we can talk a little bit about, like
Let's
what
talk
that
about that.
process.
Let me talk about that
Yeah,
because I can only imagine. You
yeah,
got you got a toddler coming in. You guys embrace it, love it, nurture it, everything that parents are supposed to do. We on our natural what we do.
sure.
And then when the baby gets back into placement with mom,
Yeah,
what did you guys go through, man? How did that feel?
yeah. I mean, to like back up a little bit, I think it starts with like, why did we get into this in the first place?
Oh wow.
Right. And like, again, not a, here's a quote, but it's not unique to me, but it's this idea of like, we don't do, we are not foster parents for the sake of gaining a child for our family, but actually the worst of like the reverse of that, it's actually giving, our family to a child. Right. And really to a child and their family, right? And
Wow.
so it's less of like, hey, how can I bring this child into my family, and actually like the flip of that. How can I give my family to this child and their family?
I never thought
And
of it that
so
way.
and
That's
so I think
powerful.
the goal there, right? And foster, when we talk about like what is the goal of foster care, is always first that the family unit would be restored, right? That it would find healing. And it doesn't make it, you're 100% right. I have like grieved like what really was like an actual loss
Mhm.
like of ours for a really long time, and that season of our life was a really challenging season, and it was grieving like a season of parenting,
I can
right,
imagine.
for us. But the goal was always that, hey, that the family unit would be restored and that like children and families thrive, right? That's even the goal. Like when we talk about Riverside Project, we talk about
That's
this
powerful.
concept of the river, right? Both like upstream, like midstream in foster care, downstream to restorative work as kids are aging out of the foster care system, saying how can we create a system, or really this ecosystem or environment here in Houston that creates a space where families heal and children can ultimately thrive. And part of that is kids going back to their families. That's the goal, right? So, but very
So
challenging.
very challenging,
Yeah.
man. So that after the 2-year-old goes back, placement back with mom, what else happens?
Yeah. So we, about 6 months before the 2-year-old reunified,
Hmm.
we took in our first teenage placement. She was 16 at the time. She's now
Those are the fun years, bro.
18. Yeah. Those were the fun years, man. Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
Took 16-year-old, 2-year-old,
Wow.
then probably like right after that, like goes back to mom. So it's just us and a 16-year-old girl. Then 6 months later, we took placement of her brother. At that point was 16. So now we have a 17-year-old girl, 16-year-old boy. 6 months later, it's all like in 6 months increments as I'm saying this out loud. But like basically every 6 months, we have another child like coming into the home in some capacity, and one that's like leaving or transitioning out or becoming independent or whatever, right?
Mhm.
And so, yeah, so at any given time, we would have anywhere from 1 kid in the home to 4 kids in the home. And so all of our kids
Wow.
in total, we call them all of our kids. They pretty much are. whether they were like legal placements of ours, whether we've like taken guardianship of them or not. It's four siblings that like we have like just cared for and loved for a really long time. And so they are now 18, 18, no, 18, 19, 19, and 20 years old. And so obviously
18,
like
19.
not
So they're
without
like
their,
back to back to back.
yeah,
Yeah, it's like crazy.
obviously not without their challenges. We're also not without our challenges, right? And I
I
like
can
to say a lot,
imagine.
it's not us doing things for them as much as like I think people see it as us opening our home to them, though that is part of it. It's the six of us like kind of doing this together. And let's like get you where you need to be, you know?
How many times did you see that you thought you were doing it for them, but you were actually gaining more out of it?
Yeah.
The
I
lessons of
mean,
life.
there's some days where I'm just like racking my brain, right? As like I'm
Wow.
doing all these things, like I've made these sacrifices, and at the same time, like I think there's been like these seasons in our life where we recognize that hey, they're working hard
Yeah.
and that it's actually like us like doing it together. I've shared this on other podcasts before, and actually the girl that you mentioned like helping her with her car, like there was this time, and this was actually part of all the fixing of the car, but she got in a really bad accident. I don't know if you remember that,
Yeah.
but she
You
got in this
did tell
really,
me
but I
that.
didn't tell you the story, I don't think, but she got in this really bad accident, and she was in the hospital for a
Jesus.
couple of days. And I remember leaving the hospital that first night and like walking down the hall. It was like, I don't know, 1, 2 a.m. And I was walking down and I was like, I just like kind of broke down in the hallway. And I was like, I just want to quit. Like, I really want to quit.
I can
I don't want to
imagine.
do this anymore. It's like really challenging. It's super difficult for me, like emotionally, physically, it's difficult on our finances, it's difficult. Like we talk about, it's like, hey, we're gonna open our home because we have capacity. And it's like, and that capacity got shrunk up real quick, you know?
Big time. I
And in
mean,
that
close for
moment,
comfort.
it like pushed me, like where it was like, man, I don't know if I can do it anymore. And then from the walk from the beginning of the hallway to the end of the hallway, I was reminded like what a privilege it is that like I get to decide to quit. And like this kid like doesn't get to quit, right? Because it's their life. And I was like, man, that
Wow.
was like a huge shift for me where it was
That's crazy.
like, so that's what I mean by like, we're doing it together. Right. And so, like, if I can choose to quit, but she doesn't get to. Right. And so it is this idea of like, we are actively seeking healing together. We're actually like actively seeking like independence together. Right. It is this idea of togetherness. So I don't know if that makes sense, but
No, it makes so much sense, but it blows my mind. Okay, I'm 46 and I've like growing up, I got all my kids are grown, like, right?
yeah.
So my youngest is 16 and oldest 27. But man, bro, you start to think about it and you're like, you're not about barely 30, right? I'm not sorry to
I'm
put
30,
you on
I'm
play.
31.
You're 31
Yeah. I'm bald. So
with
I'm starting to look a little bit older.
no, I'm not going there, bro. I'm not going there. But it blows my mind, Vic. This dude's 31 and he has almost four adult kids. Like
That's
he was
why
just like introduced into teenage. Here's some teenagers to kind
I
of
always tell
cohabitate.
people, man, like I'm like, I feel like I've lived a lifetime of parenting in 4 years, right?
Lord
And like I also tell
Jesus.
people they're like a lot of times they're like, man, I feel like you get along with like 50-year-olds better than you do like even people your age. And I laugh and I'm like, yeah, because we got the same age kids, right?
Yeah.
Like some of my like best friends, I'm like, they're like 40, you know, they're like 50. They got teenagers, you
Wow,
know?
man. So I
So
mean, I could imagine. It was painful. I didn't know about all that, but thinking about that, I was just like, here you are in the hospital, and you had that had that moment, and you feel, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't think I can. And deep down inside, you know you auto examine yourself and you
yeah,
say, yeah, but it's okay to be there, but
yeah,
I can't stay there because they're counting on me and
right.
because there's more to this. And obviously, here you are. I mean, you stuck it through, and you're a example for a lot of us that we can't do that.
Yeah,
I mean, truthfully, there's a lot of people out there that are watching this podcast and be like, well, I have my own kids. I have my own problems. I have
yeah,
this. You're going to say that. I said that. Everybody says that.
yeah,
But the Lord did
yeah.
cause for those that are hurting.
Yeah, we talk often about like I think, and this has been a big thing that like my wife and I have learned about like being foster parents and just being involved in this space in general. Um, is that like it really does teach you a lot about yourself,
Mm.
right? So it's less of like, I mean, it's the answers, right, are always there of like, hey, like, well, I can't do that because of blank, right? We talk about this idea of like, well, I can never get attached like that. But the root of that, right, is this idea of like, well, the reality is I'm too afraid to get attached to this 2-year-old that's going to eventually like leave my home. And it's like, well, I never thought that I could grieve like that. Like, that's the scary part, right? It's less of like, I don't want to be attached because like we all like attachment, right? Like
Yeah.
we all want to be attached. And the fear is less of that. And it's more of like, well, I don't know about when she leaves. Like, can I accept that? Like, can I grieve like that?
Wow.
And that's like this, like, I tell people all the time, it's like, I feel like so much closer to the Lord, like in my walk and like in my journey with Him than like through this last 4 years than anything before.
I can imagine.
Because it is this like it just brings something out of you that you're just like has less to do with my kids and more to do with me. And I'm like, well, now I got to learn how to process my own grief. Now I've got to like my kid just like pissed me off. Like
Yeah.
now I got to learn how to like control myself
Yeah.
and like my anger and my like it like both brings out some of the best in us and it brings some of the worst out.
Yeah.
And we've got to like be the type of people that just say like, how am I going to handle myself?
I'm
And so a
gonna
lot of people
navigate
see
this.
foster care as like it's all about the kids, and it is part of that. Like it
Yeah.
is a large part of that,
Yeah, it
but
is.
there is a large part too that's like, hey, it is about like I'm learning a lot about myself like through this process too. So I don't know if that makes sense, but
Oh, it makes a lot of sense,
yeah,
brother. It makes a lot of sense. I think there's a lot of people that are probably scared to even tap into that side to know
yeah,
themselves in that area.
yeah,
They're like, I don't want to know myself like that.
yeah,
I don't want to.
and
Yeah.
and a lot of the work that like we do, we talk about like the Riverside Project, like with churches and things like that, is the like can we help pastors like in our city? Can we help churches in our city help their people tap into that? Right?
Mm.
Because that's what we're trying to do. Is we're trying to like mobilize churches so that their people like we mentioned earlier can be the people, type of churches,
Mhm.
type of city that moves towards like heart and brokenness in our city. Right? That's the idea.
That's the whole
So,
idea,
yeah.
man. I'm gonna before we jump into the next subject, but I want to say this: like, what was the most challenging moments? Like, if you can share
Yeah.
one of those moments, you're like, wow, like this kid hates me. Because I mean, you gotta understand. No, no,
That's
I'm
like
saying,
every day.
yeah. Well, I mean, like they go through trauma, right? And
Yeah.
then they've gone through the system, and
Yeah.
what's sad about it is like they're treated like numbers, right?
Right.
But they have names and they have
Yeah.
stories, right? So when you get this child, and I don't want to say all of them are troublesome, but
Mhm.
in most cases, you already know that they're gonna have some kind of withdrawals of some area. And then what is one of those challenging moments that you can share that you're at freedom
Yeah.
to share?
Hmm. That's a good question. Let me first say that I think people always ask me, what's it like to be a foster parent to teenagers? What's it like to deal, or I don't use the word like deal with like kids, like or teenagers, but like that is the question that gets asked. What's it like to deal with like a teenager that comes from a hard place or comes from the child welfare system? And I always say that the stereotypes are mostly true, but it's also not as scary as people say that it is or
Wow.
people think it is. And so that's what I'll say first is that like there's some really hard things, man. Like
Yeah.
there just is, but it's also like I think if you like approach it with like this sense of humility of like I don't have to have all of the answers to this problem or to this challenge that my kid has, then you're much more equipped to handle that situation than if you walked in as like,
Wow.
I have the answers to this. And so, yeah, man, I mean, anywhere from things that happen in my home to working with the kids at like the group home setting when I was at the church, from kids like running away, from kids like having like mental health challenges to like, yeah, all of those things are super, super challenging, right? And I could go story by story by story.
I can imagine.
Um, I mean, the one that like we've talked a little bit about, but that sticks out. I mean, probably naturally, right, in some degree, like more than most, was like our kid reunifying, was caring for a kid for 2+ years for like at that point, like almost more than half of her life, right? And then
Wow.
seeing that child have to leave our home and her not fully understand. Why I think was like a really, really challenging thing. And it was like, it was challenging because it tapped into the grief, um, like side of me that like I had to like handle for myself.
Yeah.
And I've experienced like a lot of life, like a lot of loss in my life in various seasons, and I think that was one that I wasn't ready for. And
I
like
can
when it
imagine,
hit, like
man.
that was just like it was devastating. Not because it's a weird thing, and maybe this will hopefully this will make sense. It's this weird thing to be like I got into this for the sake of this child reunifying with their parent, and so it was the thing that I always wanted, but it's also the thing that I feared the most. Right. And so like on the back end of that, having to deal with like that fear, that grief, that loss, I would say like that was probably like the most challenging thing for me. But what I learned from that is the like I grieved, lost, and then I recovered. And it taught me like I can do it again. So now with our teenagers, like, yeah, like when they do things that affect me or that hurt me, like it is this grief cycle of like this feeling of I've lost, I learn how to grieve, and then I get back up and then I do it again with them. Right. And I'm teaching them, like, hopefully
No,
inherently,
they're
like
learning.
this is what like the grieving cycle looks
Yeah,
like.
yeah.
So
Kids are resilient,
yeah,
man. They're learning all
yeah,
the time. They may not tell you at this time, but I
yeah,
promise you that Proverbs tells us, like,
yeah,
you train them in the ways of the Lord. You're living what the Lord's instructions are. See, that's the thing, church. We learn Scripture, we learn it, but at the end of the day, are we doing it? Are we
yeah,
the actual tangible hand of God? Are we actually meeting the need to those He called us, for the sick, for the poor, for the orphan,
yeah,
for the widow? This is like it was a commandment, bro. It was beyond that. It was a commission. So it's like we're supposed to be doing this,
yeah,
and it wasn't a suggestion.
right,
It was a commandment when
yeah,
Jesus Christ himself said that. If
yeah,
you've done it to the least of these, you've done it unto me.
right,
And we all know the scripture. Like most preachers going to do that, and they say that from the platform. But like, are we really doing the work? And here
yeah,
you are going through it, fleshing it out, going through that process, and you are doing more of the church's work than most people sitting there for 20 years.
yeah. I appreciate that. There are many days that I'm like, I feel like I'm not doing enough.
Wow.
And so that's
Yeah.
encouraging. But I do think
Wow.
it is that idea though, right? Like it's exactly what you're saying. It's the going back to like kind of saying it again, but it is the like the vulnerable are in our city. They're your neighbors. They're across the street. They're the group home down the road. They're families that you know. We talk with like we're connected to like over 140 different churches at the Riverside Project,
Mhm.
and we tell churches all the time it's not about caring. It is about caring for your neighborhood, but we always say like you don't want to start there because these families are in your churches, right?
This is
And so
true.
it's for a
This
church
is
leader,
true.
it's to say, hey, it's less of like, hey, go and do out there,
Mhm.
but it's like it's more so like, hey, go and care and hear, right?
Mhm.
Like that's kind of the idea, in large part. So
So let's go into the next subject. I
yeah,
thank you for sharing with that. It's very private and personal, but I
for
thank you
sure.
for sharing me with that. I mean, I would say you're a much better person than I am because I don't have an experience. Now, Darlene, my wife, she did foster for a while back in
Yeah,
San Antonio.
yeah,
And she told me that it was a very difficult process to get licensed, to get all that, and then to get the house certified
right,
and all
right.
that kind of stuff. And also a teen family member.
Yeah,
And his name's Jaden. He's a great kid, just a rough life, man. Uh, you know, parents locked up, bad situation, and she took him in. And man, she tells me about the challenges,
mm-hmm.
rebellion,
Yeah,
shut up, you're not my mom,
yeah.
can't tell me what to do, the kind of stuff. But then here's the
Kind of
thing.
stuff that makes you feel real good about yourself.
Yeah,
Yeah,
soul searching, right? So here's the thing. When we were engaged and got married, next of kin, and I'm going to put this, I know this is private,
mm-hmm.
but he felt in a very, um, the best way to say it, in a very dark place. And he was abusing drugs, and we got a call in the middle of the night, and we had to rush to San Antonio because he was
Yeah,
in the ER. And next of kin, obviously, she's already grown and timed out of the system,
mm-hmm.
and she's living here in Houston. We're married now, and there we go. We drive 2 a.m., go to San Antonio, go to the ER,
Yeah,
and take care of some things and buy him some toiletries, make sure he's okay, go to recovery. And yeah, I mean, she cried it out, man. She cried it out in the hallway, and I was just like, I can't even, like, she's like, this is my nephew, but like, I took care of him.
Yeah.
And because he doesn't have anyone else, well, at that, in that moment, her brother, his father was incarcerated,
Yeah.
and he was in a lot of pain. He was in a lot of hurt, and he had no one.
Mm-hmm.
And I just remember like the process of us going to San Antonio in the middle of the night, and then arriving, going to buy him
Yeah.
toiletries, clothes,
Yeah.
going to Walmart, anything we could afford to buy, like just grab it, let's
Yeah.
go, and just being there.
Yeah.
And I know for a fact, because Jaden later came to Christ, came to church, allowed me to baptize him,
Yeah.
accepted Christ, and God has done great things now. He's still a work in progress, but I can tell you this much: they won't forget it.
Mm-hmm.
I promise you, every one of those kids will not forget it. Even the 2-year-old that will remember
Yeah.
kind of snapshots and
Yeah.
pictures of you holding her, carrying her.
Yeah.
There's something that God allows for them to remember that.
Yeah.
And you are a significant part of their life, where it doesn't matter, maybe today, tomorrow, 5, 10 years from now, they're going to remember Chandler and his home and his goofy rules or whatever they want to say.
Yeah.
And they're going to be like, yeah, he was a good dude.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's good. I appreciate you sharing that, even about like your own family. And I think that is the idea, right? Going back to it's not child for us, it's us for the child. And it is this like selfless, like even like carrying your situation, it's what else are we to do than to like open up our home? What else are we to do than to be the church that opens up our doors and cares for? And again, it's not that, oh, everybody's got to be a foster parent, right? Sometimes it's the joke is like it's the opposite. I mean, we all know people that you look at them like, I hope you're not a foster parent. You know what I mean?
I hope you're not even a real parent. Just like,
right,
hey,
right,
please don't procreate.
right. But the idea is
Yeah.
like, hey man, but you can do something,
Yeah.
right? Like I had a guy I was like sharing like about Riverside Project at this like this event here in Houston, and I was sharing like just about the work that we do, this idea that hey, everybody can do something, you know, like whether you're a business owner or you're a nonprofit leader or you're a parent or whatever, a church, whatever. And this guy comes up to me afterwards and he said, "Hey man," like he like pulled me aside and he was like, "I just wanted to talk to you. I gotta I gotta ask you a question." He was like, "I own a hot dog stand." He was like, "Can I use that for something?" Right. And the answer is like, yeah, dude, like, of course. Right. But it like reaffirms this idea of like there's a guy that just says, like, hey, like, this is
Well,
what I have. I'm probably never going to open my home, but like, I've got this business, I've got this service, I've got this
so good.
whatever.
So
Right. And
good.
we think of like over 3,000 churches in our city. We think about how many people are represented underneath that. And then saying, man, if everybody just like could do their part, if everybody could just do their something and
Yeah.
collectively come together for the sake of our city that we all want it to become,
Yeah.
like how powerful like
That
is
would
that,
be,
right?
yeah, it would
So
be world changing. We're going to jump into the next subject, but I want to just share this. Moses is like the
yeah,
actual, the founder of, the law,
yeah,
the Exodus of Israel, and everything that Judaism leads up to, and even in Judeo-Christian values, Moses, Musa, as they know him. He found himself in a position, he's in a desert taking care of his father-in-law's sheep as a pastor, and he has a staff. And it's that same staff that he goes before Pharaoh. This is before he graduates. He goes you know, into the burning bush. He gets his assignment, and he gets his anointing. His go to Pharaoh, tell him to release my people, let my people go. All that kind of stuff. And then he's like, but why me? How?
yeah,
I mean, it's me against the king
right.
of Egypt. And that's kind of like what the world, most of us would feel like. This system is broken. How could I do something?
Mhm.
And then he leans into him. God speaks to Moses and he says, what do you have in your hand? When he faces the Red Sea, where are you? And he says, what do you have in your hand?
Yeah,
That same stick that he carried in the desert to take care of a flock of sheep, it wasn't just the fact that it had to be prepared, or or somebody that has been in a financial position that they could afford things, etc., or beyond, like say I'll do things when I get better financially, or when I grow a little bit more academically, or when I'm more spiritual, let me pray about it.
Yeah.
And then God's like, no, what do you have in your hand? Use what you got. Is what
Mm-hmm.
he said. It's the point of what I'm trying to say is
Yeah.
like, that's
It's like what
exactly
we're
what the
talking about.
foster care
Yeah.
system is. It's like, I don't know where to start, but what can I do? Let me help. Let me just, the hot dog stand is incredible.
Yeah.
That's why it came to my mind. But I was just like,
Yeah.
this guy had a God moment and he said, what can I do?
Yeah.
And that's impressive, because there's some people that don't even start there.
Well, and it's empowering, right? It tells somebody like, hey, it's what you have to bring
Mhm.
is like, which is exactly what you're saying, right? With the Moses story,
Yeah.
it's enough and it's valuable. And I
Mhm.
think that's where it's like, yeah, anybody who's like, I'm a business owner, what could I possibly do?
Yeah.
It's actually empowering them. It's
Exactly.
affirming them. That's what we tell pastors all the time. Like, hey, why should I consider foster care? Well, yeah, yes, because there's so many kids in foster care in our city, but also it's to empower your people to say, hey, what you have like is valuable, right? And you have something to bring and to offer, like to the brokenness that we see in our city. So
That's impressive. Now let's dive into this. The churches, man.
yeah,
That you're partnering. I know you partner with us. I mean, we've embraced it, because
yeah,
we to go and set up these bunk beds. And here's the thing, guys. I'm gonna encourage you guys to actually do this. When you see these kids and where they live and the circumstances, whether they're allocated with grandparents or a foster parent, they're still kids just like yours
yeah,
that need care, that need attention. And as much as they see things that maybe they shouldn't have, all you had to do was show up and smile.
yeah,
When my team would show up and we'd like put some beds together or drop
yeah,
some things off, we didn't have to ask questions. We like didn't have to pray for them. As a matter of fact, most of the kids were uncomfortable, and it was just like, just show up and say, smile and say hi.
yeah,
What's your name?
right,
And that was like enough. Some kids were like receptive, and some kids were like kind of like standoffish. But it was so impressive to just be like, it doesn't matter.
yeah,
I'm not important.
right,
I'm here for you.
yeah,
And it was really an incredible experience for us to do those kind of things.
yeah, yeah.
I
That's
encourage
cool.
any pastor that's thinking about doing this, you need to do it.
Yeah,
I mean, you need to be activated in this area, because this is our city.
yeah,
This is the most vulnerable of our city. And I'm gonna, I'm gonna say something I may regret, but I really don't. I don't apologize. You send so much money abroad, and you can't even take care of those that are in the next street over. That's a problem,
yeah,
because God had to deal with me in that area. Because I mean, I worked in
yeah,
most capacity. I shared with you, like
right,
missions going to Honduras, Mexico,
right,
Central America. Like, we all did all that,
yeah,
and we still have uh, connections, and we still have affiliation
yeah,
with them. But what about my neighbors, man? What about the kids that are in my church that are living with grandma and grandpa, or
yeah,
just their parents are estranged, whatever? I mean, are you not going to care?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it is exactly that, right? Like kind of how you described it, where it is like it is, hey, go overseas and serve and do that, but like it also needs to be here.
Mhm.
And I think it is yeah, it is a lot of churches. I don't want to say all churches because I don't want
No.
a blanket statement, but it
Mhm.
is we talked about this like before we started recording, where I just, and me and you can say this kind of stuff, right? Like we've been on staff at churches, we love churches, like you're a lead pastor, like we're for the church. And so
All for
that's
the
not a
church.
question,
Yeah.
but it is the like, there is something about engaging in local, call it missions, call it outreach, but call it
Inner city,
caring for
whatever.
people
Mhm.
like that have experienced like or are experiencing vulnerability in our city. Like what you said, like those who are just like at their lowest. There is something about like I can't ignore it. It forces me to do it. And it forces like me to be in like relationship
Mhm.
with those people that
Amen.
overseas, yeah, there are people who are going the extra mile. And it's like they've got really robust relationships and they're serving there and they're there once a month and they've got teams going and coming. Like all this stuff. They're
Yeah.
bringing them here, like all of it for sure. But there's something about engaging local that forces a relational,
It is.
like, yeah, hey, you're gonna
Local
serve
is
that.
global.
You're gonna serve that kid, that family down the street. You might see him in Walmart tomorrow.
Yeah.
You might see him at the dollar store.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? And it is this like forcing the hand of like this localized like ministry
Yeah.
that I think is like scary for people.
Yeah.
I think in part because it forces us to say, hey, I can't just do this. Like you said this earlier, like I can't just do this and then check out. It's the like I'm gonna do this and it's gonna stay in front of me because it is my neighbors, it is my city, it is
Correct.
my streets, right?
Yeah.
Like
And
it's
then there's,
different.
yeah. And then there's those that are just like, oh, what about, I do a lot for the mission work. I send a lot of, all of our Hispanic. I'm talking to my Hispanic community, and I will call you out because our community, I know our community, and
Yeah,
I have the licenses to talk about it. What we'll do is we'll always send to our families and our fans, and like we come
yeah,
and we cover the American dream, and then we always send back. But it's like, you don't even know your neighbor.
yeah,
You won't talk to your friends. You won't talk to your coworkers about Christ, or you don't even know the vulnerability. I mean, you want to talk about missionary work? It's here. It's
yeah,
local. Houston is the most diverse city.
yeah.
All the needs are here. As a matter of fact, people are leaving other countries to come preach the gospel over here because they're like, they need the gospel.
All right.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying? They need the gospel. They're
Yeah,
coming here. I mean, there's no need for us to go anywhere. And I say, if you want to do this kind of work, you have to do local. It
yeah,
has to be local. That impact is local for it to be global, in my opinion.
yeah,
And the stats prove otherwise.
yeah.
I mean, I see the stats, and it's staggering. It's staggering.
Yeah. It's good.
Let's just say this real quick. There's a few people that go through the process. I'm gonna blanket all the churches, but they're
Mhm.
just like throw money at it.
Yeah, yeah,
Now, I don't want to deal with it, but like I
right.
will donate to your organization.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that?
Oh, how do I feel about that?
How do you feel about that?
My initial in some of our team and like I have this like man, and you'll understand this, maybe probably even appreciate it as a pastor, where it's like my gut reaction is to be like, man, like I just wish we could do more, right? Is like my
Mhm.
initial thought. But like there is that part of me, it's like, man, but like I believe the best like about churches and like the pastors and the leaders. And so my like initial thoughts like when you say that is they're throwing money because they do care, right? Or they're sending the check or they're sending the resources or whatever.
Right.
It's not because they don't care. It's that they don't know how to engage well. And
That's
that's where, like, when
that's
we
true.
talk about like the Riverside Project, why do we work with churches? It is solely like to connect, equip, and mobilize churches, right? To care for the vulnerable, not only within their congregations, but within their neighborhoods, right? And it is that idea of like, we believe the best about churches, that they care, they just don't know how, and
And
they
you
don't know
guys,
how
the
best to like
training and the
mobilize their
equipment.
people, right? And so the only way that they know how to care is, well, I know how to write a check. Like that is the thing that I can do. And me and you, like you as a pastor and me as somebody who's worked for a church before, like we could go down this whole tangent and like leave foster care behind and just talk about the church, really. But
Yeah.
like it really gets into
Yeah.
like, man, I really care about vulnerability in our city, but I don't have time because I'm so focused on Sunday. I'm so focused on blank. So I don't really have time to devote everything
Yeah.
to mobilizing my people because it doesn't double back on us as a church.
Mhm.
At least we don't often see it that way. And so what we try to do, like work with the churches, is to say, hey, like when you talk about vulnerability in this way, when you mobilize your people in this way, it actually makes your church healthier, more efficient. It draws people in, right? It does all the things that you're trying to do.
Right.
But sometimes it feels so overwhelming in the midst of all of the other things that you're doing as a church leader
Mhm.
that you're like, man, the only thing I can do right now is like write a check. And like, we'll take your checks. Like
Okay.
they're
Yeah. Yeah.
helpful.
We're not denying that.
They're
Like
they're
you can send your
super,
checks here
yeah.
to ground zero two as
PO
well.
box at
Yeah. PO
yeah.
box. I think your 501c3.
They're super helpful. Like
Yeah.
that's super helpful.
Yeah.
And so I tell churches a lot, like, man, maybe that's your place along the river. That's your something.
Yeah. That's your
And there
something.
are churches that I say are uniquely positioned to serve in that way. But then I think also like there are many, many churches that are uniquely positioned to be relational with their community in ways that they aren't currently. And that's also true, right? Both things are true there.
Man,
So that's my like initial thought. But
that's good,
so
man.
yeah.
That's good. So what's next for Chandler?
Yeah. For
What
me,
for you, man? You and wife.
yeah.
What's next?
For us, it's to, yeah, continue supporting our kids. Like people ask us every couple of weeks, like, hey, like, because we're technically inactive foster parents because none of our kids are directly like involved with the system at this point. because they're 18 plus.
Yeah, yeah,
And so
timed
for us
out or whatever, aged
personally,
out.
yeah. So for us personally, it is like, hey, we're an active foster parents, but we're still like doing the work of caring for the kids that we support. That doesn't stop right
Yeah,
at 18. In a lot of ways, it's just now starting.
that's crazy,
So
man.
yeah, I mean, for us, it looks like that, and it looks like focusing on them continually to help. We've been saying this that 2024 is the year of like independence and belonging for them. So we want them to be able to be in a spot where it's like you feel independent, but you also feel belonging, right? So like go get your apartment, go do your thing, go get jobs, go do school, go do whatever it is that you want to do, right? Like to be successful in
Hmm.
the world or what makes you happy. Like go do it, right? Be independent, but then we also want them to feel belonging. Hey, you have a place to come back to, you got people to call, you got,
Yeah.
your car breaks down, like I'm gonna call Danny to come fix it, right? Like
Exactly.
no,
I'll get
like
that text. I get that. I get plenty of texts like that, bro.
yeah,
Don't
but
worry
it's
about
like
that.
your car breaks down, like call us,
Yeah.
right? You can't figure something out, like at the food stamps office, call us. Like I think it's that too, right? And
Mhm.
so for us personally, man, it looks like that. I think continuing to care for our kids well, and then for us at the Riverside Project, I think it looks like, man, we want to um, rally more churches, more nonprofits, bring more people to the table. When I
Okay.
was on staff at the church, the Riverside Project asked me to. We actually were partnering with the Riverside Project at the time. This is before I came on staff,
Hmm.
and they asked me to come like share a little bit about like our experience as church working with Riverside Project. And one of the things that I said to like the group of people that were in that room was like, man, Riverside Project has the longest table in the city. And it is a table that just says like, hey, come sit at the table because your voice matters, your place along the river matters. And so for us, like as a team, it's to just continue to expand that table. More nonprofits, more non-church, more non-churches, more churches,
More churches.
more business, like people leading businesses,
Mhm.
more individuals who just say, hey, I want to help,
So
more all of
honestly, I
that.
mean, it's not so much churches. I mean, other,
Yeah.
you. I want to see like businesses or secular kind of
Yeah. Man,
organizations
we
can
got,
actually get involved with you
yeah,
guys.
totally, man. I mean, we've really boiled it down to it's organizations and passionate people,
Okay.
and everything in between. Because,
Yeah.
man, we've just realized, like, as we get needs in, we always say, just like, hey, like, this, like, mom, this kid, teenager, whatever, is one flat tire from, like, their whole life, like, derailing.
I can
And so we've
imagine.
got people who say, like, hey, man, I'm a plumber, I can fix some stuff, or I'm a painter, I can do whatever, right?
This
So
is true.
it's just, hey, who can be involved? And hey, you're invited to the table. Let's have a conversation, right? Collaborative network of people looking to, yeah, transform the system in that way.
I never thought about that, man. We're almost about to be done, but
Yeah.
one flat tire, man. I
Yeah.
know that feeling, man. I know
Yeah.
that feeling. I've seen it. I've seen it where like people just fall apart.
I mean, our kids, we use it as an example all the time. Like, hey, Chan, I got a flat tire, right? Or they call me Channy. Hey, Channy, I got a flat tire. It's like, and it's like, and I just remind them, hey, this is why an emergency fund is good. Like you need to like not like what if I couldn't pay for your flat tire today? And we use it as an example like, hey, you're
Learning a
one
lesson.
flat tire away, man, like for real. And it's not like a hey tough, like you got people that love you, man. We're gonna help you. I'll come change a tire with you. You can ride on a donut for a little bit. But like it really is like an example of saying, hey, like you really are one flat tire like away. Like make sure
That's so
you're doing
real.
the things that you need to do to care for yourself well, right? And a lot of it's just they don't know how. They're learning. We all are in some way.
Wow.
So yeah.
That's so good, man. That's so good. So how can people get connected with you guys? Where can they find you guys?
Yeah. So like I mean, the simplest way is to go to our website, riversideproject.org, scroll to the bottom, there's a contact form, reach out to our team and we'll be in touch. So whether it's a business, like I said, nonprofit, church, whatever. If it's a church, I'll be the person probably to like kind of walk you through that process of hey, this is what it looks like for us
Yeah.
to work with you. But
And
yeah, best
yeah.
way is our website.
And
So
then you guys have luncheons for training and all kind of stuff,
yeah,
like
all kinds
information.
of things. I mean, our goal is really to like I said, kind of mobilize the community. And so that's like, hey, we offer trainings, we offer trauma training, we offer church leader training. Like our focus is like really in that equipping world.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And for Latino churches, you guys have Everett Gonzalez right now, and he'll
Yep.
be a guest on our podcast pretty soon.
Yeah.
And
If you can get them on, right?
you can get him on.
Yeah.
So for push two for Spanish, right?
But yeah,
So
like I mean, that's a perfect example. Like our whole website, Everett's done a great job. Like
yeah,
our whole website is now in Spanish. Like we're pumping out resources in Spanish because we recognize one, like there's like a lot of vulnerable people that like represent that culture.
Mhm.
And two, there's a lot of churches that like can serve really well, that
Yeah.
only speak Spanish, and there's a spot for them too. So
You guys are doing a great job. I commend you guys. I really honor with the work that you guys are doing. We're always excited to be a part and affiliated with little that we can do and the
yeah,
stuff that we do
y'all been
for the
tremendous
needs.
help. Yeah,
So I'm just grateful that you guys are doing it. And the final thought is like again, I go back to it. I have to read it. Matthew 25:40. And as a king, I will answer and say unto them, surely I say to you, insomuch as you've done it to one of the least of my brothers, you did it also to me. That's Jesus. That's a red letter word, you know? And it doesn't matter who, it just do it.
yeah,
Because if you did it to them, then you did it to him.
yeah.
Yeah. So
That's good, man. Yeah, I
um,
appreciate it.
I'm very happy to have you, man.
Yeah.
Vic, do you have any questions for him, bro?
No, man, I don't. Just it's. Oh, sorry. I was forgetting something. No, it's just crazy to me that. Why do you think the process is so cumbersome? So why is it so? Is it because there's a lot of bad people out there that might do bad to these kids, or is it just because one of the things I was reading a few months ago, and I
Yeah.
was looking at it from the adoption side, how incredibly expensive it's become
Yeah.
to adopt, right? And it gets me thinking, well, if someone wants to adopt a kid, I'm sure there's going to be riffraff every now and then that maybe wants to get a kid to, put it to do labor or abuse it or
Sure.
whatever. But I'm thinking majority of those people just want to have a little child in their home and raise it and put their values on it and so on and so forth, right? So why is it so complicated? And again, I read the article from the adoption side, but
Hmm.
I have heard the foster, I don't really have experience in it, but I've
Sure.
seen it and
Sure.
heard it. So why do you think why does it have so much red tape?
Yeah. I mean, it's a really good question. Obviously, with like a lot of layers to that. On the adoption side, right? Yeah, like private, domestic, like adoption or national adoption, like it's always going to be like super expensive. On the foster care side, for the most part, like there's minimal like costs, right? And there's, like I said, there's a lot of layers to that. But yeah, man, that's a really good question. I mean, there are times where I've gone through the process and I've been like through like when you go through the licensing process. I assume that's what you're talking about.
Yeah.
But like when you go through that process, you're like, man, it just shouldn't be that hard
Yeah.
to like open up my home, right? But then like it's like one of those things. Like when I used to work at a church, we used to like joke of like, yeah, there's this ladder policy. Like that is the stupidest policy that I've got to have this ladder certification. But like then you go back and you're like, yeah, there's probably a reason why there's a ladder policy, as stupid as I think it is. And I felt a similar way of like licensing processes at times where it's like, man, it shouldn't be that hard for me to open my home. But also like, man, there's just a lot of like, um, yeah, there's a lot of people I think in the world that like having the additional hoops is probably beneficial in a way. And I think that the idea there is like trying to keep kids safe. And I'll be the first one to say that, hey, like not all the systems that we have set up or have in place like are accomplishing that, right? Like our
Mhm.
founder, Amber, she said this to me years ago before I came on staff, but she said it in a training. She said the foster care system is broken, and that's including you and me. And that was like really
That's
transformative
heavy.
for me to be like, dang,
That's
like
heavy.
that's true. And so I don't know, that probably doesn't super answer your question, but I mean, I do think the primary goal of it is like, hey, how do we keep kids safe? But at the same time, I mean, I think there is room and space, and Riverside Project's been a big part of these conversations to say, hey, can we all come together and just acknowledge like this process is really confusing or this process is really hard. Can we make it more simple, right? For kids to get the care that they need and to stay safe. And like both is possible. And so you're not like super far off to say, like, hey, why is there so much red tape around it? But I could tell you stories for days where,
So if
yeah,
you were, let's say all of a sudden I imbued you with the power to be able to ratify and change this system. Okay. I just gave it to you right now. Boom. You have it. You have the legal authority.
yeah.
Knowing what you've gone through, you know, going through this process and having foster kids now with you, what changes would you make?
Yeah.
to make this a more expedient process?
I don't know if I would. So
Good
you're
question.
obviously asking me. It's like off the top of my head.
Sorry.
No, you're good, bro. You're good, bro. The top of my head, I don't know if I would make it a faster process. Like if you gave me that power to like change something,
Mhm.
my initial thought is that I would make it to where two things. One, that resources wouldn't be so hard to get. And so like that comes from a place of both like as a foster parent and watching my kids trying to navigate resources for themselves that they're due, that they're owed, that they like
Yeah, I can
qualify
imagine.
for.
Exactly.
The amount of hoops that they have to do to get that resource is very significant. So that resources would be more accessible. And then two, how I've and I have talked about it a lot, that like a mentorship, like an outside community mentor
Absolutely.
would be like not an option. Like you had to have one,
Mhm.
like as a kid in foster care. And so there is some of that. It's a little bit more complicated. Not everybody gets like that program or whatever, but like that every single kid would have a person that they can like call when things are hard or when they say, "Hey, I know I'm supposed to have this resource, but I don't know who to talk to or who to call. Can you help me do it?" Or, "Hey, can you go to the housing authority with me?" Right?
Yeah.
Like housing going to a housing authority is like really complicated.
Yeah.
Right? So picture like you're just turned 18 and like you're trying to go up to the housing authority. Good luck, man. Right? So if every single kid just had that one adult, it's like, yeah, I'll show up to the housing authority with you. Yeah, I'll show up to help you navigate resources and benefits. And so those would be my
Yeah.
things. I don't know if my focus would be like, let's make this process like more efficient. We talk a lot at Riverside Project. It's not how can we get more foster parents um like quicker, but really like how can we like promote like sustainable foster parents for like the long haul. Um so I don't know if efficiency like makes that better as much as it is like how do we focus on the like, hey, foster parents like the turnover rates like a year, but then they're like, all right, I'm good, right?
Yeah, I can imagine it's incredibly,
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
a turn on.
difficult on a couple, on a relationship, on finances, right? Because I
Yeah.
know that there's a stipend
Yeah. Yeah.
that the when you foster, you get a stipend.
Yeah.
But literally, so one of the mega churches I led worship for many years ago, they had a foster care program because the guy who ran the church also had a school.
Yeah.
So they started a foster care program there, and a lot of the leaders fostered kids.
Mm-hmm.
But it was the same way as you mentioned. You know, they would all talk about it privately. They'd be like, "Man, I mean, what they give us compared to what we spend doesn't." So you're doing it
No.
because
It's far
I
surpassing.
mean, I've heard people
right.
on both ends of it say like, "Oh yeah, you should just never get money for you shouldn't have to take a stipend to like open up your home and blah blah blah." Like, and I totally get it, and I'm like, yeah, man, that's because you ain't had 4 teenagers before. That's like always my thing.
Yeah.
I'm like, it's just
Yeah.
but it's two sides to that, right? I mean, I've heard stories where foster parents get money and not a cent of it goes to the kids that they care for.
Oh yeah, there's abuse
Right?
in the system.
Yeah, totally. But for us, right? Like man, it is, yeah. Like I mean, you mentioned it like with your boy, like talking about like, man, he came to y'all with nothing. And it's like you gotta go to Target, you gotta go to get groceries and get everything that they need,
Yeah.
right? You want to have them involved in sports. And as personally, right? Like I can only speak from my own experience. But as a 31-year-old, I became a foster parent at like 27. It's like I don't have the financial resources that somebody in their 40s or 50 does. I just don't,
Yeah.
right? I'm younger, but I've opened my home to teenagers, right? My life phase is not in a spot where I would be a teenage parent, but the needs of my kids are. And so that's a challenging part too. But yeah, so it can be costly for sure.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, and we can acknowledge that there's a lot of riffraff out here,
Yeah.
right? But I always kind of try to look at humanity in the best light, and I think,
Yeah.
well, even though there's riffraff, right? They have to be outweighed 10 to 1
Absolutely.
of good people that are legitimately trying to offer this child who has probably been through some traumatic things a better life, even if it's for a short term, right?
Sure.
Same thing with adoption. But that is one thing that's always kind of bothered me. I wish uh, the government looked at those kids a little bit different and maybe offered more support instead of funding some of the things that we fund that maybe
It's
seem a little bit
ridiculous.
outrageous, right? Especially whenever
Absolutely.
we're looking at some of these projects that are like, oh, how much did it cost to build that bridge to nowhere? How many billions of dollars? It's like we could have given like a tiny little sliver to foster programs or things like that. But yeah, that was the only question I had. Sorry to interrupt the podcast.
No, you're good, man. I mean, I think there's a lot of room for like there's, and that's what we talk about Riverside a lot. It's like it's always every initiative that we have multiple initiatives, right? Church engagement is one of them, but it's all been created out of, hey, what are the gaps in the system and how can we bring people to the table to help solve them? And it's you said it well, man. It's the like, and it's one of our cultural values, like as staff. It's, hey, we believe the best in each other and we believe the best in our community partners. And even from like a state level, it's like, man, I like DFPS, CPS, like they get a bad rap, but like they're one of like our key partners, you know? And so for us, it's like, man, we choose to believe the best like in them and can also recognize, hey, there's gaps in the system that we need to fill. Let's bring everybody to the table and let's figure it out together, right? And that's the idea, is to say, hey, how can we be an entity or be a people and then coach other people in churches to do the same, to bring organizations, passionate people together for the sake of our city, right? I think that's the idea. But it's a good question for sure.
Fantastic. Man, good stuff. Thank you, man. Thank you for the input. One thing for sure. Do you know they've spent $340 million in research?
Research for what?
To give cocaine to birds.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That sounds like a reasonable expense, though. Let's keep that
You know some of those expenses?
So that's
That's not fake news, bro. Like
I haven't heard
misuse
that.
of funds for government funds.
Yeah.
It's so ridiculous.
No,
Don't
it
even
gets
get me
out of
started
hand,
on
man. It gets out of hand. There's a lot of people in the States that could use. I mean, and it's not just the foster kids, but you also look at the homeless, situation that we have. So there is a lot of people that are suffering out there, and it was so interesting the way you put it, because I remember being a young man and being broke. And
me too. I am that young man. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, fortunately, I'm not that young man anymore. But I will say I remember that, and I remember that it was that dramatic. It was that if you got a flat tire, you were, how am I going to eat? Because I mean, I was going to use that to buy dollar tacos at Jack in the Box. Do you know what I mean? And then back then, you would get a Whopper for $1 or $2, right? Whatever. Yeah. So I was like, okay, I'm going to eat, but now I can't because I got to go buy this $40 used tire that has a patch on it, because that's how you get used tires, right? And that was life. So, and the thing is, I had a family that if I really needed them, I would go to my dad, be like, Dad or Mom, and here's some money. So whenever you don't have that, man, your life will spiral. It will. It's guaranteed. And then that becomes a detriment to society.
Yeah, and I mean that's the thing, right? It's asking the question of how can we disrupt that cycle, right? For a lot of these kids and families, for sure. It's good.
Good stuff, man. Thank you so much,
man. Yeah, man. Thanks for having me.
Man, bro. Great work that you guys are doing. So we're gonna add. Thank you for sticking around to the very end. This is the end of our podcast, but we're gonna put a link to an actual video. We want you to check this video out. You want to get connected? Please do. Even if you're not part of a church, or your church, maybe you're a leader of a church and you're watching this and you want to get involved, it's time to get involved. If you were waiting for a sign, here's your sign. Riverside Project is an incredible tool to actually help the most vulnerable here in Houston and beyond, because these kids are going to grow up and they're going to go different places of the world, and you can be a part of that because you made your voice and your print on them. So last thing, man, you want to go ahead and tell anybody the last thing? Just anything, last words for you. I'll give you your last words.
Yeah, man. No, I mean, I think it's exactly like what you said. I think it's recognizing, hey, this exists, right? And so if it's somebody who's listening to the podcast, like I was, like when I worked at the church on the north side of Houston and found this group home that was 20 yards from us, it is the, like, when you become aware of something, the question is, what am I going to do about that? And so I think it's not to say that, hey, everybody's got to do the same thing, not to say that you got to do everything, right? But to say, hey, how am I uniquely positioned? How is my church uniquely positioned? How's my business uniquely positioned to care for the vulnerable? And so that's all I'd say, is just ask yourself that question. I think it's a good question to start.
Chandler, thank you again. Sure. Thank you so much for joining us, bro.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. Great work that you guys are doing out there.
Yeah, same to you. Appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you guys. Thank you for joining us. This is our podcast for today, and we'll see you on the other side.